Hi, and thank you for tuning into the Nature Conversations podcast. I'm Dr Adam Forbes. I'm a forest ecologist who specialises in the restoration of New Zealand's forest ecosystems. This podcast isn't about me, however. The purpose of the Nature Conversations podcast is to capture knowledge and insights from remarkable people and to profile important issues for ecology and nature conservation. Robin Chazdon is Emeritus Professor in the Ecology and Evolutionary Biology Department at the University of Connecticut and a part-time research professor with the Tropical Forests and People Research Centre at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, Australia. Her research focuses on successional pathways, forest regeneration, drivers of land use change, and ecosystem services provided by forests. She is the principal consultant of Forestation International, a consulting group established to support implementation of forest and landscape restoration globally. She has authored or co-authored over 200 peer-reviewed scientific articles and book chapters, and co-edited 2 books on tropical forests. Her book, Second Growth, The Promise of Tropical Forest Regeneration in an Age of Deforestation, was published in 2014.
It's really not just about the people, it's not just about the biodiversity, it's not just about, climate mitigation. Also, it's about all of the above, and shows that you can, with the proper planning and ingenuity and engagement, you can accomplish all of those things. We are a part of the regeneration process just as much as the other creatures out there, and we can help that process along, and it will also give our lives more meaning.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Robin Chazdon to the Nature Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today, Robin. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Would you like to just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself in terms of your professional background and how you came to work in the field of forest restoration?
Well, I started out as a professor, actually, at the University of Connecticut. And I began there working on secondary forest regeneration in Costa Rica, following many years of working in Costa Rica and noticing forests popping up in areas that used to be pastures, and realizing that there wasn't much information out there on what was going on and what are the factors that influence this process of forest regeneration. So together with a collaborator, we started out studying this process a few years into my arrival at the university, and it ended up being a 25-year long journey. During that time, I became interested in learning about forest and landscape restoration, learning about forest restoration in general, and realizing that the work that we were doing had a lot of relevance to that, because we were studying tree species and how well they grew and survived. And some of those tree species could be planted and could be used in planting programs, but also simply seeing how well the forest was recovering in many of our sites made me realize that tree planting is not always necessary to accomplish reforestation and vegetation regrowth. And it's also much better for restoring the native biodiversity. So this started becoming a preoccupation as I learned more and more about restoration, and learned that it was very much focused on tree planting, at least in the forest realm. And I'm still on that journey. I retired from teaching at the University of Connecticut in 2016. And since then, I've been working a little bit more outside of the academic world and working with several different organizations. And now I've been able to start sort of an organization of our own called the Assisted Natural Regeneration Alliance, thanks to the support of the World Resources Institute and a project that they are doing in Brazil on assisted natural regeneration. So we're getting things moving along and trying to cover a lot of the bases, both in terms of underlying research, evidence base, policy issues, and implementation issues. How how can we scale up the assistance of natural regeneration in forests, and where are the best places to be doing this, and what are the best local community situations and contexts where this can be done as well. So we're trying to attack this from all sides to really push forward.
Well, that's so interesting. Thank you for explaining that. I'd like to take the conversation to forest landscape restoration. It's a topic that I'm only vaguely familiar with. In New Zealand, it's not something that really gets talked about, but I have a feeling that sort of an integrated approach to managing forests with people and landscapes is possibly the key, really important aspect that perhaps New Zealand could be looking at, rather than more of a siloed approach looking at things individually. So one of the things I'd really love to hear from you is just some, given your expertise in the topic, some background on the topic, perhaps some principles of forest landscape restoration, what it means, perhaps for people that are not familiar with it. Would you mind just going through that a little bit for us?
Certainly. Some people call it forest landscape restoration, and some people put an "and" in there, and there's some slight conceptual differences there. But in general, this is a landscape approach to recovering many of the properties of an ecosystem, and I think of that more in terms of a landscape, more in terms of functional properties, things like watersheds, the functioning of watersheds, the functioning of areas for wildlife, the functioning of water supply, water storage, water quality, providing materials for local use, local needs through forest recovery. And the really beautiful thing about it is it can be applied in almost any landscape where you have a diversity of land uses already, and you can plan essentially what are the most appropriate types of recovery processes to put in place in different regions. It could be agroforestry around urban or rural settlements. It could where people have food security needs. So you could be growing crops, but also introducing trees into those ecosystems. It could be riparian zone restoration, where there's been degradation of riverbanks, and that could be more natural vegetation focus, riparian restoration. It could be woodlots for supplying timber and firewood for local people while also increasing tree cover. So those could be planted tree covers. It could also be assisting natural regeneration in areas where, for example, agriculture is no longer viable, or land was cleared, but really it's not being used effectively. And there are sources of seed very close by. So the forest would essentially grow back more or less on its own with just some help. So it's like a multi-purpose type of approach that tailors the specific type of intervention to the local context, but ties it all together in a landscape plan involving the stakeholders that are either live or work or otherwise very invested in the future of that landscape.
Yeah, that sounds really, really important, very inclusive. So can I ask a little bit of detail, like, would there normally, is there a governance group, or how is it governed, or how is it like led among the different landowners and stakeholders? Is there one particular party that does that?
No, and this is one of the challenges, because it depends a lot on it could be a jurisdictional type of approach. For example, the landscape could be defined by, as a municipality, or, some other kind of geographic unit that has some political integrity and already has some institutions that are created. So it could be built into those institutions. It could be, a group of farmers who are sharing a lot of the same areas and are affected by let's say the river degradation or water supply. So they just do a collective action to work together to better manage their local areas. So there's no defined size of the landscape and there's no defined governance mechanism. But it is very important to have the engagement of all of the stakeholders in the area and to not have this be a top-down prescribed type of activity where, let's say, a government entity, comes in and they want to plan everything. That could work, but only if they are really engaging the local people with from the very beginning and throughout the process.
Just to help the listeners conceptualize this a little bit further, with your experience, are you able to describe an example of forest landscape restoration where, perhaps where it's gone really well or where there's been some positive gains made? Could you share anything like that with us?
I think there are quite a few out there. One of my favorite examples is in Brazil. It's in an area in the very western part of Sao Paulo state called Pontal de Paranapanema. You don't have to remember that, but it's an area where there is some substantial protected forest, but the whole rest of the area was converted to pastures and had very unsustainable land use. Since then, a group of landless people have come in there because there was some uncertainty about the land ownership. Some of these titles were just given by the governor to people, right, informally. So they came in and they have their settlements, and they are doing a local NGO was working with them and effectively got them engaged in all kinds of training. They learned how to do agroforestry plots, and they learned how to do protection from hunting. They learned how to help to track large predators, which are still in the area but very scarce. And there's an endangered primate there that they also, there was a real need for conservation and for creating corridors between existing areas of forest. So they were planning the restoration to create corridors, which is exactly the landscape approach I'm talking about. They were providing livelihoods for people. All of the nurseries that supplied the seedlings for the planted areas were owned and managed by local people. So they were employing local people, and it was a huge success. It's still ongoing. They're doing a lot of planted forests that are regrowing very well. And those areas are connecting. They're built in places where they know the animals like to walk, like to go. So they're also providing better habitat and better connectivity for the wildlife. So it's really achieving so many of these goals. And as you said, it's really not just about the people, and not just about the biodiversity, not just about, climate mitigation also. It's about all of the above, and shows that you can, with the proper planning and ingenuity and engagement, you can accomplish all of those things simultaneously.
Are there some main points that come to mind for you in terms of making forest landscape restoration work well in practice? Like what makes it successful versus what can lead to failures?
I think some of the best cases I know of have had a strong and very involved local NGO engaged who can perform in ways that are really critical. For example, they can be a linkage for scientists to become engaged and other government agencies who want to come in and do trainings. So there's a focal point there, and they build trust with the people by demonstrating their interest in helping provide for the needs of the people and listening to them, what they need. And without that kind of a strong local NGO, it's very hard to get things moving and to sort of concentrate a lot of efforts and then distribute them evenly. So that's one thing, and not just a quickly assembled NGO, but a group that's really has a history of working in the area, that has established deep roots and strong trust with the community.
Fabulous. And tell me, Robin, I'm gathering that in practice so far, forest landscape restoration has been mainly in tropical regions. I'm not sure if I'm right on that. I might be wrong. I guess my question is, do you think it could be expanded more broadly to other areas on the planet compared to what it's currently rolled out at?
Yes, it certainly can be, and it has been. In the United States, for example, the U.S. Forest Service has worked on collaborative projects with private landowners, because you've got a lot of close proximity between national forest and private land in the United States. And so in order to do a landscape approach, you really have to engage landowners. And I think you're right that most of the examples have been focused on the tropics because of the concerns about deforestation, number one, but also the fact that there are a lot of rural people who are living day to day, kind of hand to mouth, and this approach is more suited to meeting their needs than a top-down prescribed kind of approach. And that's where the engagement comes in, and that's where providing livelihoods and food security and water security and fuel wood security, all those things that people need, in a way that is built into a restorative mechanism. But it can be done anywhere.
Oh, that's very interesting to hear. I just feel that there's probably much more need for a landscape approach and integrated approach, certainly in New Zealand, and to be working with private landowners rather than perhaps, having tension or working to different objectives, put it that way. I think so that I'm very interested in your experience and how we might be able to make some changes in New Zealand lines.
Yeah, I think some government agencies are already working with both public and private land, and thinking about it in terms of here in the US, in the Western US in particular, fire mitigation is a huge issue, and it requires a landscape approach. We're involved here in a project that is involving, I think, 7 different private landowners to reduce fuel wood load in the forest, as they've become rather filled up with trees excessively and are a real risk for fire, which is natural around here, but if we don't thin, we're going to have a very, very serious fire, and it will be very difficult to control. So these are the kinds of situations where government agencies, that either forestry agencies or water boards or other kinds of groups, can certainly make the effort to involve private landowners, because we're all in it together.
Yeah, that's so interesting, Robin. And I'm just thinking about the New Zealand context and some of the issues we're facing. And I'm sure they're not unique to New Zealand, but things like soil erosion and erodible geology, flooding in lowland areas from more extreme events, and I guess increasing wildfire. New Zealand hasn't really had a natural history, and fire hasn't played a major part in New Zealand's forest life history. But I think given the mixed nature of vegetation cover and a lot of the high flammability species, wildfire is also something which is going to be becoming more of an issue for us. So just hearing that landscape scale approach is very interesting. And I'd like to just take us back to your initiative you're working on with the assisted natural regeneration project that you've started. I just would like to ask, what would be your main goal there? Like, what would be the one thing that you'd really like to achieve from the time that you're putting into that project?
Well, we would like to see more scaled up implementation on the ground, but also implementation that is monitored and that is contributing to a growing evidence base that then will sort of create more awareness among the policy community, among leaders in society who like, wow, you can do that, and it only costs you that much. And boy, if we had to plant trees in that whole area, it would cost 3 times that much, which is a good ballpark estimate. And wow, we should be doing that where it's appropriate. So it's really, we want to try to raise the profile and involve, but not just tell stories. We really want to get good data and have good proper monitoring be going on so that we can show with evidence what the outcomes are and how they're different from, if you don't assist regeneration, or how they're different from a full tree planting program. That kind of involves the research side, involves the policy side, it involves the implementation side, it involves getting the communications right. So it's a multifaceted approach, but we want to see more action on the ground, and we want to see it done well and in a way that we can use as a model for showcasing the benefits that it can provide.
I think from what I'm hearing, your work would be of a lot of interest to us in New Zealand as well, because I can see that there's some reluctance amongst government and policy to always recognise the option of natural regeneration. I think sometimes it's seen as a little bit of a uncertain option, and I've also seen some struggles, I suppose, with people trying to determine when is adequate regeneration, and particularly around grant schemes where people are given money for what they call reversion in New Zealand, and when is enough, and when can we be sure that regeneration is adequate and there's possibly signs of succession. So I guess it's just cleaner and easier to plant some trees, and how many you've put in and what density they are, and you can see them, and so yeah. I can relate where you're coming from.
No, those are exactly the same reasons that are prevalent in many other countries, and I could give you a lot of other reasons as well, but a lot of it is that people feel it's a big risk to just sort of let nature take the lead. And to really do A&R well, you need to kind of have a deeper understanding of what may be blocking restoration. If it's not going well, what are some specific things that could be done? And those understanding those mechanisms and having the tools to recognize those factors are not things that foresters are trained to do particularly. So part of that is some retooling. We need to do better training. We want to organize a course on a certification for A&R practitioners course, which would provide a lot of these basic tools. What are some indicators that the site is a good option for assisted natural regeneration versus what are some reasons to not choose to do A&R in a particular location.
Fabulous. It sounds very worthwhile, and once again highly relevant to our ecosystems and the issues we're facing too. So just be encouraged that there's probably a very, very wide application for what you are working on, and I think it's very exciting. And I think in this day and age, it's really important that we kind of stretch the value from the work that people like you are doing to apply as broadly as possible, because if we were in New Zealand having to recreate everything that you're leading the way with, that would be a shame. So hopefully we can benefit from your work.
I hope so. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool. Look, there's one last thing I'd just like to put to you. It's a bit of a fun question. I'm imagining that you're a person that spent a fair amount of time out in the field and probably in some interesting locations on Earth, and I just wondered, is there anything memorable or sentimental or something that's happened during your time out in the field that springs to mind and you might want to share with the listeners?
Well, there have been many wonderful experiences. So I would probably say that what I value when I think back on my time with the project in Costa Rica, there was a 20 year project where we were following the seedlings, trees, and saplings in a variety of different sites that were all undergoing natural regrowth. Whenever I would be able to go down and work on the project with the local technicians who were there year round, I would go out in the field with them. And I remember catching them during time they were doing a seedling census, and was just so amazed at the seedlings that were coming up in some of our sites, and so excited to learn, that some of these were seedlings that are much more, we tend to find commonly in an old growth forest, and realizing that it's happening, they're coming back. Nobody planted them, except birds and bats and maybe some monkeys. And the process was working, and these local technicians had all the knowledge they needed to look at 1,000 seedling plots and score, who was coming in, and who died, and what new ones were coming in since the last census. And we now have, so much data available from the project on trees, seedlings, and saplings, and a lot of the seedling data is still not been published. So there's still so much data that many years from now I'll still be working on it, and trying to get other people to work on it. So I think, for me, what I've learned is that you can spend fairly short time in the field, but get enough information for that is really meaningful for a long period of time.
Fabulous, Robin. And it sounds like you've been quite successful in helping a number of other people grow and learn and get involved as well. I would say you've left quite the legacy. So well done on that, Robin. It's awesome. Is there anything else you'd like to say on the podcast, Robin?
Oh, well, I just to say that working in natural regeneration has fueled my optimism about the future. And whenever I start to really think dark thoughts, listening to the news, I go out in the forest and I look at what's coming up. And there's always stuff coming up. And it's not Costa Rica, it's in Colorado, but I think that we need to really maintain our strong connection with nature and really feel that we are a part of the regeneration process just as much as the other creatures out there, and we can help that process along, and it will also give our lives more meaning. Thank you so much, Robin. I really love your perspective of how integrated everything is, and how it's not just the forests and people, but it's all together in one ecosystem. So it's really awesome to hear and to think about, and I'm really excited about putting this session out to the listeners. I'm sure they'll benefit from it greatly. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Great, Robin. Okay, well, we'll end the podcast here, but thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. All right, thank you. You're welcome.
Robin has been on a long journey, a journey that started as a professor looking at forest biology, and one that expanded into the world of restoration at a global scale and into the real-world implementation of successful restoration. What I took from Robin is that restoring forests is as much about working with people as it is forests. I am also impressed with her multifaceted view of forests and how they fit in with a wider ecosystem and among diversities of land uses, conservation needs, and human preferences. Robin talked about the possibilities of what can be achieved for people in nature with proper planning, building trusted, deep-rooted relationships, listening and responding to locals' needs, and taking a bottom-up approach through a restorative framework such as forest and landscape restoration. It's also great to see Robin following her passion with assisted natural regeneration through her ongoing research program, aiming for scaled-up implementation, which is monitored and adding to a growing evidence base to promote managed natural regeneration over tree planting where appropriate. Thanks for sharing your experiences on the podcast, and all the best with your ongoing work, Robin. If you enjoyed this podcast, remember to bookmark it so that you receive notifications for future episodes. If you'd like to support the production of the podcast, you can do so via my Patreon account. There is a link in this episode's description. I aim to release new episodes every 3 weeks, and your support would help me achieve this. Thank you so much for listening, and catch you in the next episode.